Okay, in a previous video, we went over the concepts of formless and void, and how if you look at the outside of the oculus, you will see the formless and void version of a reality. When you put the headset on, you see the formed and filled version of the reality. So it's interesting that the descriptions at the beginning of the Bible make sense to us now, 6,000 years later, as we develop the technology to be able to make machines that act as minds. They don't have souls or anything, but they process thoughts, and we load them with thoughts which can define a reality. This is absolutely fantastic. What a great time to be alive. I'm going to also take note that in that video, I think I've been dealing with the rocks again at the Horseshoe Bend Canyon site. But I've started this up, and I haven't moved away from the ledge here. And if you notice, this is the point where the shadows are still intact. And see how they follow this is why I did this earlier with the concept of the physics required to calculate and maintain the objects. But it's just fun to note that at this point the shadows are on, and I'm not positive, but I think the setting is if you move back about 10 feet in the reality. If I were to get up, let's try it. I'll walk back here. Oops, we're going the wrong way. Here we go. And then I'm going to walk back up. Okay, let's see how we do here. All right, there's something. The shadows are still there. I'm not sure what the trigger is, but when I move around the reality, the shadows drop off, and I'm not sure what the trigger is for that. But if you run it a bit more, then we'll see. Okay, so we dealt with formless and void, and that's a separate video. I want to if I've gone that far out on a limb, let me go all the way out and say I want to talk about Ex Nihilo, the idea that God created everything from nothing. And that's absolutely a stumbling block to the unbeliever, because, how could you create something from nothing? Well, again, we're kind of looking at it here. But we have a very interesting situation set up here. We have just created a reality from words, from thoughts, firmly upheld, which is exactly what the Bible describes. But we're using machines to do it. Now, God didn't have machines, but he has his mind, which he describes to us as it's infinite, and it is easily able to do this and much, much more. So the question is, have we created something from Ex Nihilo by creating this, the canyon and the rocks? I would say yes, but this is an interesting answer. This is a rock. We went over that in the other video, and in the video that said, do rocks have to be made from atoms? They do not. Why? Because this is a rock and it's not made from atoms. Now, the thing that we've kind of, sort of the unspoken rule, is that if we've said a reality, it's not real if you could just see it, that could be a mirage. But boy, if you can touch it, and we can touch these things, and if you can hold it, and if it has mass, does it have mass? My goodness, it has mass, because the force of gravity on this thing is pulling it toward the center of the Earth. How about that? So this it reacts to gravity. So we're starting to use things like a version of the scientific method here, which is fine. But what we're really finding is that we know at the same time that these were artificial rules written for this reality. Well, how about that? God wrote the rules for our reality. So we are creating something from nothing. These are just made of thoughts. Boy, they sure look solid. They are solid. We run tests on these things, and I can feel that rock clunking there in my hand that they've given me here. And that passes through to my real hand in my real reality. But this is made of thoughts. In truth, there is something here and there's not something here. The thing that is here is rules, but it forms a rock which is important for me to know, to see in this application, especially if you want to tour the Horseshoe Bend River Canyon. It's important for that. But It's made of thoughts. Well, does that make it any less a rock? Apparently not. It acts like a rock. And for these things here, this is all I need. Maybe God did the same thing. Well, so we've made things ex nihilo, out of nothing, by just using words. This is amazing. We have created things ex nihilo. My goodness, that proves that God could have created things ex nihilo just by using words. Well, that's what he did. We weren't paying attention. We didn't have devices which could demonstrate it for us in a show and tell way to say we can do the same thing. Look at this. We created rocks out of nothing except words, firmly upheld. But we need a machine to create a mind strong and fast and big enough for us to process the thoughts that we need to make this active and move in this reality and be updated constantly. Now the question is, we've come to a conclusion here that God could have created things ex nihilo, out of nothing, because we've done it and we can touch these things and prove that they exist in this reality. That's amazing. If this reality were upheld permanently for us, or for hundreds of years, let's say, these things would, and if we didn't know any different, if we were born into this reality, we would say these rocks are real. And we can run all kinds of tests on them and prove that they're real. And they never change, as long as this reality is upheld. So can God create a reality ex nihilo? Absolutely. Did he do it with words? I believe so, because that's what he says. He issued the commands, and they stood firm. And that is exactly what the Oculus is doing here. We are issuing the commands to make the Oculus issue the instructions, and it holds them firmly. It upholds them firmly. But let me take this on a side note. Could we have created things ex nihilo without God? We can create things ex nihilo with God. Could we create things ex nihilo without God? The answer is no. Why? Could they have created this reality 500 years ago? No, they didn't have the machines. 100 years ago? No, they didn't have the machines. 50 years ago? They had the machines, but the machines weren't strong enough. 10 years ago, I think they were starting to then. Probably the military had early versions of such things. We need machines to generate these, to process that. We can come up with the thoughts. We can provide the recordings of data to feed into the machines that have the model of a mind, and we can create a very big reality that's bigger than our minds can hold using machines. But we could not have created the machines without having the materials that God gave us. Isn't it interesting, as computers have developed over time, we've proceeded to smaller and smaller and faster materials by studying the resources available on this earth, which he gave us. And it's fascinating that the materials just so happen to have, isn't it coincidental, just the right properties to make them just powerful enough to generate things like this. Coming up with the finding of semiconductors. Holy cow, did that miniaturize things. So that's interesting. We're in an interesting dilemma. God gave us materials knowing in advance, because he says he declares the end from the beginning. He wrote a letter to Cyrus about 100 years before Cyrus was born, or his parents were born, or his grandparents were born, on and on. Think of all the coincidences that would have had to have lined up for God to write a letter to Cyrus way generations before his birth and describe him by name and the things he was going to do, and he issued him an order: let my people go. Their time of punishment is up. And Cyrus did. So isn't it interesting? The God that knew those things in advance knew that we would reach this point, understood it in fantastic detail, and provided the materials that we would need so that we could build a reality from nothing. We cannot do this with our own minds. I'm sorry, but there's supposedly a man who's memorized pi to 100,000 places. That's extraordinary. That would not be enough to do this. And we need something that can communicate this to our senses, which God does, His Spirit to our spirit. Can spirit sense? Absolutely. That's what Genesis 1 states when it says God saw the light. That was important, that the description of God up to that point was that He was spirit. There was no air, there was no sun, but He saw, He sensed. What that means is it feeds through to us that our spirits can sense. Well, that simplifies a problem that hung over us. If these things existed on their own, how do you stitch a material body to an immaterial spirit? Well, that's solved by having a spirit be able to sense what the great mind, God, allows it to sense, and then everything else is greatly simplified. You make we call them avatars in the movies, but it's more than that. The body that we have has so much for us to interpret and sense in this reality. Sometimes it's overwhelming. But what an extraordinary experience God has given us. But our minds are not great enough to do a reality like this on our own, or even if we could, to be able to communicate it to our senses. But God has given us materials in the reality that He made with His mind and provides to us to use. Knowing that we would reach this point, and knowing that we would build a reality from nothing, which is exactly what we've done. We've built it from thoughts to show us, yes, a reality can be created from ex nihilo, from nothing. But boy, the mind you have to do it. So how great is our God? He is an awesome God. He is an awesome God. I rest my case.